Hello everyone, I'm Ari Lax, and this week we are going to be recording with the Dredge deck that Jason Chung ended up top 8ing Grand Prix Melbourne with. I believe this is based off a number of lists that Rolf Levy has been working on for years. And by years I mean like the... Was that the first one that it was legal at? Yeah, the first Modern Pro Tour that Faithless Looting was legal at. I played against him playing this deck, and since then I think Rolf Levy's played it at every single Modern Pro Tour. So he's been working on this, and this is kind of where he's ended up. And Jason piloted it to a top 8 at Melbourne, and it's put up a number of 5-0s in the hands of a specific player. I'm blanking on their Magic Online screen name in the weeks since then. But unlike traditional Dredge, this is a lot closer to what the original Dredge decks looked like in Standard. So before Dredge Return, before Narcomoeba, what the Dredge mechanic did was it built a big graveyard. You got a payoff for having cards that cared about a big graveyard, but it really was about selecting your draw every turn and building your graveyard along the way. So this deck, you have your graveyard payoffs, but every turn you're trying to draw the Dark Blast, that's good. The Life from the Loam that loops the Ghost Quarter, that's good. If you want to gain life, Brown Scale, Necroplasm, Stinkweed Imp, whatever. You're not all about just putting, 48 cards in your graveyard at once. You're more about generating long-term value. So these are the 16 cards that get you started. So Zombie Infestation, obvious discard outlet. In the late game with Squee, that's a way to get going. Being repeatable is important. We'll get to a couple of the key interactions with that later, even if just for putting Dredge cards back in your graveyard over and over. Dark Blast is conditionally a starter. Against some decks, you just crush them with Dark Blast and they just die, like Infect. But sometimes it's just a blank, so you have to, if you keep a Dark Blast hand, you have to trust the matchup is good for this to be a starter, especially if you're going to be relying, Dark Blast is what you're going to draw most of your draw steps. Is that really what you want to do? Faithless Looting is the most powerful starter. It's a card that is really, really good. Turns out that Careful Study is already a constructed playable Magic card, and giving a flashback makes it better. Shocking. Honestly, this is one of the most underplayed cards in Modern, and by underplayed I don't mean that more decks should play it that don't. It's just shocking to me that it hasn't found more homes where it's extremely powerful. Yeah, it's just really good. And then Life from the Loam, pretty easy starter. You can play it with no targets, get it back, get lands, and just kind of do all sorts of crazy stuff. Everyone knows about what Loam does. Looking ahead, we've got 2 categories of payoffs. We got creatures and spells. Bloodghast. This is your chip shot way to kill them. Not that exciting of a Magic card in this deck, but it does enough work, and it's pretty much the best thing that does what it does in the format, so whatever. Got a bunch of different Dredge options. We're not all in on Grave Troll because we don't really need 40 cards in our graveyard. We're trying to draw the best card every turn. We do have 15 creatures. Eventually, Grave Troll will get to be, a 5-mana 6/6 or 7/7 that regenerates, which is decent. The old school standard Dredge decks had a lot more creatures, and Grave Troll was reliably like a 10/10 that you'd cast every single turn, but not really the case here. It does find you a specific card if you need that, but Stinkweed Imp, pretty good card to loop. Can virtually lock some opponents out of the game. So your Imp's in play, they can't attack, you're doing stuff. They attack into the Imp, you trade for a creature. You just draw a removal spell every turn, basically. Brown Scale, bit harder to loop in some of the ways you want it to. But in the matchups where the 2 life every turn is going to lock your opponent out, very good. And then Necroplasm, decent against, Malira, Elves, Infect, that nonsense. But really specifically there to mop up tokens and things like that you're going to have trouble dealing with. Also kills endless ones on the first turn, worth noting. Vengeful Pharaoh is really one of the payoffs of this deck that is, yeah, this card is good. So what's going to happen with this card? You're going to put it on top of your deck, you're going to discard its Zombie Infestation, you're going to kill the next attacker. Really, this deck is kind of a stack where you end up in a repeatable board state. every single turn where your opponent eventually just has no more options and dies. Vengeful Pharaoh is the best way to do that. There's only 3 because the card's not great in multiples, but the first copy just locks some decks out of the game by, they attack with their creature, it dies, you kill their next creature, etc., forever. And then Squee, just some additional value, way to make Faithless Looting or Zombie Infestation put you up cards in the end. Also, moving along, spell payoff, Conflagrate. Squeeze a way to make Conflagrate deal more than 7 damage for bending your whole hand or 8. So Conflagrate is kind of the end game of this deck. You wrath them with the first one, and the second one just kills them in the end. Chip shots, a few blood gas hits, and then all of a sudden they just die to a Conflagrate where, the start of your turn, you return 3 Squeeze, so you go up to 10 cards in hand, and then you drew Loam for your turn, from your Dredge Loam for your turn, so you're up to 11, then you Loam, and you just Conflagrate them for 13, and they die. Some Lingering Souls for chip shots, not the most important card of the deck, but still good. And then a Deadly Allure. Yeah, I got nothing here. It's a decent removal spell with Bloodghast, but I got nothing. This is just a magic card. I don't know. It's just there. Looking at the lands, you got a standard fetchable mana base with fetch lands. Worth noting that, as with most Dredge decks, you're going to run into this problem where you have to fetch your specific source before you accidentally put it into your graveyard sometimes, though with Loam that's less of a concern. But sometimes having to jump through that hoop of a draw step and a couple mana to get back, your one Temple Guard and cast your in-hand Lingering Souls can be a problem. So if you can avoid that up front, there will be times where, you know, you're gonna play Faithless Looting, so you want to fetch before you do it, so that you're sure not to mill. You're gonna dredge some cards. You don't want to mill the land that you are gonna look for. Ghost Quarters for the life of the unlocking in certain decks. A Vault of the Archangel is kind of your end game. There's times where you can get into these weird stalled board states with like Blood Gas and Zombie Infestations unable to break through some stuff. And it's gonna take forever, and you just vault, and then they die, and you attack. This card's very powerful. Also, Vengeful Pharaoh, you can take enough hits that you die, your life total is a resource, and Vault kind of flips the script on that one. One thing worth noting, you can actually just cast Squee as a chump blocker forever. Good old Bippy Boppy Squee just doing his business. Moving the sideboard, it's just a million ways to beat the hate cards. So you Thoughtseize them, you Ancient Grudge the Relics or the Needle Spell Bombs, you Ray of Revelation the Rest in Pieces, and then a couple random cards, Memory's Journey against other graveyard decks, and Raven's Crime against combo decks just to empty their hand. That's just like a pretty solid way. A lot of combo decks in this format have real issues with just getting their entire resource set binned by Raven's Crime over time. So, yeah, the deck's really linear, really straightforward. Kind of interested in seeing if I end up actually liking this. I know I've not liked the Dredgevine decks in the past because they're equally linear to something like Infect, but like not as fast and easier to one card hate. So, but this feels like it attacks from a different angle. I'm excited to give it a try.